this method that Raymond devised really worked in helping people see departed loved ones. I was skeptical until I saw my own father. And then Raymond started to bring other people in. There was an experience with the comedian Joan Rivers. Her husband had committed suicide when she was not getting over that well. She went into the psychomantium and she came out weeping, just weeping, and saying that she had seen her husband. And she said we were able to work out a lot of issues that we had had before he passed away. A psychiatrist who came to see his grandmother. His grandmother walked into the room, three-dimensional, and spoke to him. In this case, her son picked her up and hugged her. That's how she said the session ended.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
We are here with Paul Perry, co-author of 6 of Raymond Moody's books. So welcome, Paul.
Hi, AJ. How you doing?
You just released the second edition of Reunions, and it talks about encounters with deceased people, right?
I've worked with Raymond now for 38 years, and together we've written 6 books and have been involved in 2 or 3 films. And of all the books that we've written and all the books we talked about doing, probably the most controversial one is this book, Reunions. It's a book about how to see and communicate with departed loved ones. What it deals with is an ancient Greek practice of what's known as going into the psychomantium. The psychomantium was a room where people would go in and they would desensitize by meditating in the dark and thinking about a loved one that they would like to see and have some kind of communication with. And then Raymond altered it for the 21st century. It's a method of seeing departed loved ones, communicating with departed loved ones. Sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's visual, sometimes it's both. When I finally believed in this was when I tried going into the psychomantium on my own. I went in to see my father, and I followed the procedures that Raymond had devised. And what happened was I went into the psychomantium, I followed his methods, and all of a sudden, it's a form of mirror gazing. And all of a sudden, in this mirror that was in front of me, in a almost perfectly dark room, I suddenly saw my father. My father manifested in this clear depth of this mirror. And when I saw him, he was in a very dark plane. He was standing at the end of a pier. And I knew there was water out there, but I couldn't see it. But there was a sense that there was water there. And my father was looking out across the water. And he turned when I walked next to him. And he spoke to me, but he didn't move his lips. We just spoke psychically to one another. And I had always wondered what would I say if I was able to encounter my father again. And I said the most pedantic thing you can imagine was, "How are you?" That's all I said. "How are you?" And he spoke to me once again without moving his lips and told me that he was just fine and that he liked where he was. He thought it was beautiful. Some things defy description, and they defy an ability to define what just happened. But that's some way I feel about this, is that it was literally like I would walked into a dark room and I could stop for a moment, and there was my father in this semi-darkness. I also have to point out that it's strange to hear this, but he was glowing. And he was kind of glowing the way you would get a glow off of metal that was reflecting some kind of sunlight. So he was in this dark room, but he was the only thing in there that was I say kind of glowing. And like I say, he was speaking to me psychically. How this happens, I really don't know. We had a few more moments of silence right there, standing next to my dad, and then he disappeared. And that was a very mild psychomantium experience, but it was one that impressed upon me that this method that Raymond had devised really worked in helping people see departed loved ones. The one that was most impressive to me was the one that I witnessed myself. Up until that point, I really didn't believe it. Uh, it's just very difficult to believe. It's difficult to talk about some ways with a straight face. So the first person I saw uh, was a woman who showed up at his psychomantium. Raymond built one in his house where he would see patients and clients at other times. There was a woman who came out. It was the first time I ever witnessed it. And a woman who came out and she desperately wanted to see her husband. Her husband had died within a year, and she was just very lonely and very upset and wasn't getting over it. And she went into the room and within about an hour came out and she said, "Well, Henry sat down right next to me." And I had the most wonderful conversation with him. And then he just disappeared. But it changed her life. It was like Raymond calls it a kind of ultra grief therapy. And he uses it a lot in dealing with people who have grief and can't get over it. And that was the first one I saw. And I believed it really happened to the woman, but I'm still at the time was still very skeptical. I was, like I said, I was skeptical until I saw my own father through this method. There was one woman whose son had passed away from AIDS, and he had been in a lot of pain, and she wanted to know. Basically, she wanted to know what many of the people want to know is, are you okay? Are you okay where you're at? And so she was asking her son that during her psychomantium session, but nothing happened. She returned to her room uh, and she went to bed. It was probably about 9 or 10 at night. Room was dark, of course. And she then suddenly envisioned her son walk into the room. And at first she thought it was an intruder and it frightened her. Then he spoke to her once again without moving his lips and said, "Everything is okay. I love where I'm at." And they spoke for quite a while about his illness, about their lives together, and by the end of that, she was really satiated that he felt good and was happy where he was. Another thing that happened in that, though, and this is rare, but it's happened to many other people. In our case studies, we have people who will then, in this case, her son picked her up and hugged her. That's how she said the session ended. Her son picked her up and hugged her, picked her up off the floor, hugged her, and then he walked away and disappeared. And it was grief is a very difficult thing to overcome. And she said that this was the best thing she had ever had done uh, to overcome grief. And so at that point, Raymond started to see the real value in this as a way of dealing with grief. Grief is very difficult to overcome. Years later, people still grieve for someone who has died years earlier. Now, Raymond does a much better job of explaining what it is. So, AJ, you have footage for that. So why don't you put that on as well?
In college, as a philosophy major, I had learned that the psychomantions, or oracles of the dead, were very important in the origins of Western thought. A lot of people thought it was just legendary because how could it be that there could be a place where you could go and go through procedures during which you would seem to see and converse with the dead? It didn't seem possible, so a lot of scholars back in the 20th century thought it had to be either fraud or else some kind of legend. Well, in 1988, I read an article in a classical journal about the rediscovery and excavation of the most famous of the oracles of the dead, the one in northwest Greece that Herodotus, for example, talks about. I had a friend, Bill Hay, who was a retired military officer and a handyman, and he came to my house and he built this chamber, which was just a little room with mirrors in it, and so that you could shut it off from light. It could get very dark in there. A comfortable, easy chair a few feet in front of the mirror with a little light in the back so that the room could be dimly illuminated. Then I asked 10 of my graduate students of psychology, who were very curious people and very bright people, if they wanted to participate in a procedure of calling up the spirits of the deceased. And out of curiosity, all of them agreed. Then as word spread about this among my medical colleagues, for example, a lot of them wanted to do it out of curiosity. Imagine my surprise when the very first person I put in there, who was a very wonderful and grounded psychotherapist, 44 years old, who had lost her husband 2 years before, and so came and prepared all day to see her husband. And when she came out of there, she said, well, it wasn't her husband that she saw, it was her father. But not only that, she said that she saw her father immediately, or first appear, in the mirror, but then her father stepped out of the mirror, full color, 3 dimensions, right in front of her. And since that time, which is in 1990, I've guided literally hundreds of people through this procedure who have very dramatic encounters with the apparition of a departed loved one.
This man was a medical doctor, by the way, from the Midwest, and he was a self-described mama's boy, and he really missed his mother, and he was trying any way he could to overcome that grief. And he went to Alabama, where Raymond's psychomantium was at the time, and he went through the session, the methods that I had described earlier, and he had a very profound experience. Where his mother came out of the mirror and sat next to him. And she spoke to him about their lives together and told him, don't worry, don't grieve, get over it. And that's what he did. When he came out, he was weeping. And he said it had definitely, if not cured him, certainly helped him with his grief, because he saw that his mother was fine, and he was able to put those fears behind him and move on. And that's one of the types of cases we'd run into. There were a lot of people, eventually, as the techniques improved, there were a lot of people who talked about their departed loved one coming out of the mirror. And they would generally sit down next to them, or they would come out in some form, maybe half body or something. And or that's what they perceived was a half body. They didn't focus on the rest of the body. I don't exactly know. There's a lot of variety in this. And they would talk to the person in 3 dimensions. And then the person would once again dissipate. Sometimes it would go back into the mirror. And that was one of the ways they manifest to people. So another case is a psychiatrist who came to see his grandmother. He loved his grandmother very much, and more than his own parents, and so he wanted to meet with his grandmother again. And in this particular case, his grandmother walked into the room, and 3-dimensional, walked into the room and spoke to him. She welcomed him to wherever she was. And he was said, well, who else do you see? Who else do you see from the family? And she said, well, your grandfather is standing right here. He's right behind you. But he doesn't want to talk because he's embarrassed. Now, the psychiatrist didn't know why he was embarrassed, but he couldn't get him to talk. So he ended up just continuing to talk with the grandmother. And according to her, his father was right there the entire time, but he was just embarrassed and no one knew why. And then Raymond started to bring other people in as clients, and he was experimenting with it to make sure it worked, and he had refined everything. And and we built up a caseload of case studies of people who saw departed loved ones, spoke to them, felt them, uh, and sometimes didn't see them in the psychomantium, but later when they returned to the hotel at night, they would see them. And sometimes you get multiple people showing up, and that's a good thing. Sometimes you get people who uh, you hear them, or someone said reports that they're there. I'm here with all of our other relatives from other, that you never met, and then they would sometimes even see the other people, and they wouldn't verbally communicate, but they would see them, and the people would then later remember who they had seen, their faces, but they had never met them in their lifetime. And they were able to identify them through old photos as being the person who was standing in the psychomantium with the person they had come to see. And sometimes you don't get a choice of who comes up. So there's a number of cases where people come to see a father or a mother or a brother or sister, some other loved one. And instead of that person coming up, instead of the mother coming up, the father will come up. And in the course of greeting their dead father, they'll work out some problem that they had with one another while they were both living. Uh, and that, of course, would be a fantastic method of treating grief and treating those problems we all have with our parents. Uh, so yeah, there's many permutations of this, many of them. There's all types of manifestation, if you will, of the people you've come to see. For example, there was one woman, her name was Jill, I believed, and she came to see her brother. Yet when he manifested, so did I think it was her parents, and perhaps it was her parents and another family member. And so the three of them manifested. So she had kind of this manifestation party. And what she did say afterwards, she was elated, just thrilled beyond belief to see these dead relatives again. And she said that they looked so real that it was almost like she was sitting there across the table from them, and she was carrying on this conversation.
So, Paul, the first time this book was released was a lot of years ago, and it caused such a sensation that Raymond was on Oprah Winfrey's show, and it was really impacting, right?
That's right. I mean, she came on as a complete disbeliever. And one of the first things she said, I can't quote her exactly, but one of the first things she said was, uh, Raymond, people are going to think you're crazy for suggesting this can happen. And he replied, once again, not exactly, yeah, I've said a lot of crazy things, but they've always been right. And in this case, it was right because then Oprah on the show, she brought two people on to undergo the psychomantium experience. One was a man, I'm not sure what he did. He might have been a lawyer or something like that. The other one was a woman who was an Air Force major. And they both had very vivid experiences. The major's mother came out of the mirror and sat next to her and spoke to her. And the man was a similar experience. I don't think anyone came out of the mirror, but I do know that he talked about all of a sudden seeing these images come up in the mirror, and he was able to communicate with them. And at the end of the show, Oprah was still kind of a disbeliever, but she couldn't deny that something magical had happened because these people just looked like they had been changed. So there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical, but skepticism is a good thing. And you might be skeptical and a total disbeliever and come out of an event like this and feel like a believer, or just still be skeptical, but keep looking anyway. Well, you have the Oprah Winfrey show. Why don't you just put it on?
What really happens when we die? We've been talking about that before this show started with the audience. I don't know what you believe. Maybe you will change your belief after today. It's up to you. My guests today swear that they have seen visions of their departed loved ones. Some have even had conversations, they say, with them. Listen. While inside that room, just seconds before this video was shot, this young man claims he saw a vision.
Then I had this feeling of just someone kneeling beside me, you know? They didn't touch me, I just kind of felt there was someone there.
Because then something would happen, I would come back, and then I would be back in the room, and I couldn't remember what was said to me.
Well, those four people have never met until today, but they all make the same extraordinary claim, and that is that they have communicated with the dead. At the forefront of investigating these strange encounters is Dr. Raymond Moody. He is a psychiatrist who says that we can talk to and we can see the dead. He even has instructions on how to do it. It all took place in rural Alabama, where Dr. Moody lives, and he does this unusual research. I have many questions about this.
Me too, by the way.
Many.
Much to my surprise, number one, the people who go through this do experience this as real. In other words, no matter, even though you might be very critical going in there, once this happens, it really presents itself as a real experience.
Well, many people say that Dr. Moody has lost his mind, but we'll be back in a moment.
One funny thing about that is that I realized some years ago that if I did a new piece of work and that my colleagues did not conclude on the basis of it that I had lost my mind, then I better backtrack and figure out where I went wrong.
Sometimes time changes a lot. So when these people are there, they may speak to somebody for a minute, they might speak to them for less, but it always seems like it's a substantial amount of time. So there's a tendency to compress time by a lot of the people who try this. But there's a lot of people who see a number of people. And sometimes you even hear people talk about, with a near-death experience, a person goes up into a tunnel. That's a frequent event that happens when people have a near-death experience. And they go into the tunnel, they see past relatives, they see relatives that they don't even know. And they might recognize them later from old photos that the family passes around. And they'll say, oh, I saw that person in the tunnel or this person in the tunnel. And it's the same way with this, is that sometimes you try to manifest a specific person and you manifest an army. You get many people come in. And so that's, you can't always control who you see and how long you're able to speak to them or what you're going to see or experience. But that's the beauty of it, in some ways. The fact of the matter is that most of the people who come in have an experience that is a paranormal experience. From day one, I've believed that these are very powerful experiences. I don't exactly know where they come from. I don't know if they open a door into a mystical world that we only are able to visit occasionally. But in the last couple of years, probably in the last 5 years, I can't remember the exact date, we had a case study that really convinced me objectively that people are seeing departed loved ones. Here's what it was. A woman came from South America to see her daughter who had been dead for 90 days. She had cancer and she passed away at a hospital in South Carolina. And she wanted to see her daughter again to make sure she was okay. So she came, she went through the whole procedure. she was kind of uptight, as Raymond put it, but she went into the psychomantium anyway, and she sat there for over an hour and nothing happened. She gazed into the clear depth and nothing manifested at all. So she was here with her sister, and they went back to the hotel, and they were going to try it again the next day. But they were at the hotel. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, so there was sunlight in the room. And they were talking, she and her sister were talking, sitting on their respective beds in this room. And all of a sudden these orbs came into the room. There were 3 orbs, clear, about the size of a much larger beach ball. And they drifted into the room. And both of the women saw it. And the woman who came to see her daughter began to communicate with one of these orbs. They were big, clear, like I say, ball-shaped orbs. She started speaking to it, and said she was communicating with her daughter in this orb. And luckily, her sister took out her iPhone and took 2 photos, both with the orbs. One was, on one side of the room, and then it had moved to another side of the room. One was close to her, and one was a little bit farther away. But to me, that was objective proof that something had taken place, some form of orb-like consciousness had manifested from the mirror. And that convinced me that, one, consciousness can separate from the body. And 2, that we actually saw photographic evidence that this took place. So now I've gone from being a skeptic about this to being an objective believer, because I felt that was a very objective experience. So we continue to look for more cases like this that are objective, and meaning that they can be proven by witnesses who saw the same thing that the person says they saw. And that's what we're looking for in the future. But I just want you to know that it's used therapeutically. It's used largely as a grief treatment, and that it's very effective. We've included the photos in the book, our second edition, and we included the story as well, in words and not just pictures.
A friend of mine, a podcaster, Tia Renee, told me that she, after her husband died, she actually went to see Raymond Moody after reading the book, and she was taken to Raymond's psychomantium, and he taught her how to build one. She built one at home, and she had an amazing experience. Let's hear what she said when I interviewed her.
Great idea.
So I read this book by Dr. Moody, and in the back of the book, it had his contact information. And I contacted him on a whim. I didn't think he was going to contact me back. I emailed him, and I heard back, and he invited me to his home, and I spent the day with him there. It was just an amazing experience. And he lives in this really awesome old mill on a river, and it's 3 stories. He took me up to the 3rd story, and he's got a psychomantium built up there. I did kind of see something. It looked like 1,000 spider legs just kind of going like this, but I didn't see what I wanted to see. That was my husband, Terry. So I went home and I made a psychomantium, not nearly as good and not nearly as probably all the required aspects of it, but I made one in my house, and I made it in my bedroom. I lived in a really small house, and I didn't have much room, and I wasn't sleeping in my bedroom anyway, so I made it in there. And every day I would sit. One day that there was a shadowy figure. I don't want to say a shadow figure, because that brings up negative connotations, but I mean, it was like the figure, a humanoid figure, okay, like a head, shoulder, arms, and it floated out of the mirror, and hovered over me. I was laying down on my bed in front of the mirror, and it hovered over me. And I felt it stroke my arm. And I just got chills and I got goosebumps. And then it went away. So I didn't really sit with the psychomantium too much anymore because I felt like that was what I was looking for. I got what I needed. And then, gosh, there's so much that happened. You want me to talk about all of it?
If you decide to involve yourself with the psychomantium, my strongest advice is to be open-minded. Don't be skeptical about it. Just you don't have to believe it and you don't have to disbelieve it. And then also accept what happens. And if you're lucky enough to see a departed loved one, which you probably will be, carry on further with it. Do it again. Keep trying it. And it'll open up a whole new world for you. Raymond initially read a lot of books about Greek visionary practices, some practices by Egyptians, and then every single culture down through history has had a method of communicating with the dead. And it often involves what we call mirror gazing, but it's looking into a reflective surface that if you tilt a mirror just right, for instance, you have a dim light on, the mirror will show you a clear depth. And that's the one that works the best. And so he set up psychomantiums doing that very thing. We have in the book, we have a whole schematic, if you will, for setting up a psychomantium. But roughly, I'll just say that he would have a very dim light behind somebody, small light bulb, really small, and it would be up here out of the vision of the mirror, and the lights would be down. You would be relaxed from meditation, and be staring into this clear depth. And sometimes your mind, as I've talked to people, case studies, they say, well, I was really thinking about seeing my father. I was really thinking about seeing my mother. And other times people just go into kind of an automatic drive where everything sort of blanks out and then an image will come up. But in one way or another, when the psychomantium works, an image does come up into the mirror. And some of these are quite extraordinary, I do have to say. Raymond worked with this, and he knew it worked because it had worked in ancient times, where the Greeks people would go into a cave, and that was the beginning of their psychomantium. They would spend sometimes several weeks, generally not. Generally, it would be a few days. And they would spend a few days there, laying down on a platform. They'd be well satiated, so they would give them food and water. And the room would be almost perfectly dark. And after a couple of days, these ancient priests would decide that the person was ready to see a departed loved one. So they would take them down a hall through this cave, and they would come out into a big room. And that's kind of surreal in a way. If you can try that. You probably get that same feeling late at night if you get up and you go into your living room, and if your living room has a high ceiling, there's kind of a surreal feeling to going into it. But they would go into these rooms with high ceilings, and in the middle of the room was a bronze bowl, a very shallow, large bowl. And they would put water into that, and then pour olive oil on top of it. So it would have kind of this glistening type of mirror that would create a clear depth. And they would stand around this bowl, and they would say, they would think about seeing a certain person or getting an answer to a question. Where's my car keys? Things like that. And they would look into this bowl, and sometimes a person would manifest from the bowl. And it was an image that was probably only seen by them. I say probably because there might be some variations to that. But this person would come out of this bowl through this mirror-like environment, and they would have a connection with this person, a conversation, or just like I say, visual or just auditory sometimes. And there were reports of these images coming out of the bowl and entering the room. And they would still have a conversation with the person as they were standing right next to them. And sometimes the conversations were lengthy. Sometimes they were short. They were always vivid, and they were always very memorable for these people. And if you think about the explanation that I just gave, like a bowl with water and oil, you can see how Raymond was able to take that and transport it to modern times, where instead of using a messy bowl of water and oil, that he was able to take a mirror and tilt it in such a way that you get this clear depth. The clear depth is, for the most part, clear, is for the most part required to having an experience. He built this psychomantium in his house that was in a room with the mirror and the light. Sometimes he would use a candlelight, and he would kind of encourage these people through meditation and through a light meal and no caffeine and a short walk around the country area where he lived. People would then really relax. And he would have them sit in there and relax and look at the mirror and just think, let their mind go into overdrive. If you look at this book, you'll see that this isn't something Raymond invented. This is something that has been around. We find record of it all the way back to the early Greeks. The record we find is in Plato's Republic. And there's a case study that he has that Plato wrote about in the Republic, called the Soldier of Ur. And it was a soldier who was wounded, and they thought he was dead. And he was going to be put on a funeral pyre because they were burning all the bodies. And they put him on this funeral pyre, and he got up, and he began to talk about seeing dead relatives himself. And he spoke about it for quite a while, and then he passed on as they put him back on the funeral pyre. But that's one example from ancient times, from Plato's time. I mean, you see this in Egyptian literature, Egyptian historical studies. The Egyptians would do similar things to try to be able to see their dying relatives. In fact, the Mayans would do something like that. They would do different techniques. They didn't use mirrors. They would actually bleed their kings and their queens. Oftentimes, they would bleed them until they were on the brink of death, and then they would either continue to die and they would get a new king or queen, or they would stop the bleeding when this person started to say that they had communicated with their forebears about a problem that they had. And there generally was environmental in that time, because there were horrible droughts in Mexico. And they would ask the past king or queen how to overcome this problem. And the king or queen would provide kingly advice, if you will, queenly advice, royal advice to the current kings, who would then address the nation from the top of a pyramid and tell them what they had seen and heard from past royalty. Now, that sounds like you wouldn't believe that, but in fact, if you go into many museums that feature Mayan culture, and the place I saw it at was the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. They had an exhibit of Mayan culture, and part of the exhibit was that they talked about this method of seeing departed loved ones and how they used it basically with royalty. And then they would take a needle from a sea urchin. very sharp needles, of course, and they would put it into excuse me, this is the X-rated part. They would put it into an artery below a man's penis. And it's a very active artery, and they would bleed this blood into containers. And at the Getty, they have the urchin spine, the containers. They have a container that you would then transfer and pour it into a larger bucket, if you will. And they would bleed these people until they died or were close to death. And that was their kind of one of their versions of a psychomantium. Also, with not Mayan, but with Aztecs, they used to use onyx mirrors. And onyx is a beautiful black stone. Very when it polishes up, it's beautiful. And they would gaze into that and do the same thing that people can do now at Raymond's psychomantium, which is look into this reflective surface and get a clear depth. In this case, it's like through the mirror darkly, as they would say. And they would then see departed loved ones.
There's
Let me continue for a minute. When the British took over the Aztec society, they brought some of these onyx mirrors back to England. And a man named John Dee, who was a genius, a mathematician, a creator of moving statues that would be on stage in different theater shows. He got one of these onyx mirrors, and he used it to help Queen Elizabeth I do mirror gazing. It's also called scrying, and he was her official scryer. And she claimed to have seen many things. She actually said she saw the destruction of the Spanish Armada on its way to England to take over England, but it sank in a storm. And she said she saw that through this mirror a couple of days before it happened. So this has reached people throughout the centuries, and it's reached people of all different parts of culture, from royalty to people on the street.
Where can people find this book?
Probably right now, where 60% of all people find their books, and that's on Amazon. If you want to see our website, it's on glimpsesofeternity.com, and that's our book site, Raymond and my's book site. But
okay, well, I really enjoyed working with you on the book. I was in charge of the layout and also uploading it to Amazon, and it was a great experience.
Well, you did so much more than that. I mean, you did a lot of fact checking. You did a lot of conversational help. You did a lot of work. Don't underplay yourself.
So do you have any message for the people who are watching this and may be interested in the psychomantium?
Well, if you decide to involve yourself with the psychomantium, my strongest advice is to be open-minded. Don't be skeptical about it. Just you don't have to believe it, and you don't have to disbelieve it. And then also accept what happens. And if you're lucky enough to see a departed loved one, which you probably will be, carry on further with it. Do it again. Keep trying it. And it'll open up a whole new world for you. So at this point, my best advice would be, number one, get the book. It'll explain to you how the psychomantium works, how cultures down through history have used it successfully, and how to even build your own psychomantium. We have a schematic in there for that. The other thing I would do is approach it without skepticism. I would approach it, you don't have to believe it, you don't have to disbelieve it. You just have to be open-minded to it. And then see what happens. I think you're really going to be surprised.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.